our last community of practice session for 2022. It's really great to see so many new as well as familiar faces online. Please do introduce yourself, your area of work, and any citizen science projects that you might be working on in the chat while we wait for any others to arrive. Today, we're really happy to be joined by Tracy Colby-Alexander from the Centre of Health Research at the University of Southern Queensland, who'll be speaking about their team's use of citizen science in the Toowoomba Healthy Towns project. Just quickly, first up, I'd like to note we're recording this session and live captions have been enabled. So we'll make the recording and a brief text summary of the session available following. If you did want to use live captions, you can select the More Options button on the top or bottom right corner of your Zoom meeting controls and select Captions and Show Captions. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country on which I'm joining you today from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. This is country on which I live and work, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which others are joining us today from. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. We really encourage you to share the lands you're joining the session from in the chat. So my name's Leah Marks. I'm based at the Menzies Centre for Health Policy and Economics at the University of Sydney, and I'm part of the Citizen Science and Prevention project team funded by the Australian Prevention Partnership Centre, which aims to embed citizen science approaches in policy and practice settings across Australia. You'll also see Pippi Walker and Yvonne Laird on the line with me, and they're also part of the Citizen Science and Prevention project team. So as part of this work, we host this community of practice, which brings together people from research, policy practice, and community settings who are interested in using or interested in learning more about using a citizen science approach in chronic disease prevention. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this seminar as part of the community of practice. For any of you who are new to these sessions, they're really an opportunity to learn from others about how they've applied citizen science approaches in their work to address key prevention challenges. And it's meant to be a window into the experiences our speakers have had with applying citizen science approaches, which aren't always seen in a scientific paper. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Tracy today about their experiences. And if you're interested in finding out more about the community of practice, we'll share details about how you can sign up at the end of the session. But I'll stop speaking there and hand over to Tracy for your presentation.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I'll just share my screen quickly. Just to comment on what you said about not seeing this in scientific presentations, I delivered a similar presentation on citizen science, and a comment from the audience was they don't perceive this as research or science. So how's that for a start? Sorry, I'm just organized. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen, and just also we'd like to acknowledge the co-authors as part of this project. But before I go any further, I am on the land of the Yagara and Jagera peoples, and I would like to acknowledge them as the traditional owners on the lands and waterways where I work, but also where my research is conducted. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. Just by way of overview, my work forms part of the Stanford Our Voice methodology. So Professor Abby King is the global leader of this network. And so I would like to start off the presentation by giving you an overview of Our Voice And just to acknowledge that those slides, everything with maroon or maroon in Australian, is Abby's slides. And then I'll present the Toowoomba Healthy Towns to you as a case study. So I'm not sure on, I think all of us have some idea of what citizen science is, but our voice citizen science approach is the by the people example of citizen science. And it aims to empower residents to advocate for healthier neighborhoods and communities. And that advocating could be for a range of issues. It might be related to physical activity or healthcare service provision or even food outlets. And anyone can be trained to be a facilitator for the Our Voice initiative. It could be a researcher like myself, but it can be a community member, local organizations, or various government groups. So I think what's important and what appeals to me about Our Voice is the two perspectives that it uses. And the first one is community-based participatory research, where residents help to identify the problem in their local community and also give some solutions. And this is certainly the way we've approached it for some of the work we are doing in Oakey and Toowoomba. And then it uses the citizen science methods, which brings a systematic way, and it's scalable so that residents can identify real world data and see how they can, how it influences their health, and also how they can present some potential solutions. So I think in terms of the methodology, Stanford makes a discovery tool app available. I'm quite technology averse, and I think the beauty of this app is that someone like me can use it irrespective of my technical literacy. And this has been translated into more than 13 languages already. And the app has been used by a range of ages. This is just some screenshots of the app. So it's called the Discovery Tool. It can be downloaded onto Apple or Android devices. You can select the language, just find it, select the language, and essentially this person will press start to start the walk. And before they start the walk, there's just a reminder in terms of some safety things. So for example, don't stand in the middle of the road when you're taking the photo, or also being cautious about including people's faces in the photographs or in number plate registrations and so on. They then take the photo, and I'll go through this in my methodology as well. And once they've taken the photo, they rate it as either good or bad. And then they add a either via text or voiceover as to why they've taken the picture. And I think the beauty of this app is that it's geocoded and the route is GPS tracked as well. So this is an example of some of the outputs we get when we're accessing the data of the database. So this could be the picture the person took. Here we have the geocoding, and then this is the transcription of their reason for taking that particular picture. Once all the walks have been concluded for the particular project, we can see a summary or the group data of those particular walks. And these various things give us a very quick overview of the residents' perspectives of their neighborhood, for example. So wherever you see a green pin, they've clicked the happy face, indicating that it's a positive feature. The red means negative. Orange means something can be both positive or negative. Or here where you see the gray pins, the person didn't give a rating of either good or bad. So once the residents have taken all the pictures and you've finished, all your citizen scientists have done their discovery walks, as we call it, they share their photos and their stories, and we do this in a workshop. And in the workshop, the residents themselves or the citizen scientists themselves come to a consensus in terms of the themes that they're organizing their photos in, but also the highest priority actions and looking at realistic areas for change. And I'll speak to realistic when it comes to the trawling in Oakey. And then from there, they select or they self-select 2 or 3 citizen scientists that will go and advocate these decisions and these requests to decision makers with the idea of developing feasible solutions. And then together with the local decision maker, which might be a school principal, if it's in a school setting, there's been some in a hospital setting where it was with hospital staff, and then others where it might be councillors or council settings, formulating action steps to advocate for changes. So just some of the, pardon me, some of the successes, because the idea of doing citizen science is to generate change, and just from around the world, our voice has led to improving walkability, improving access to public transport, more greenery, healthier school environments, and also safe routes to schools, increased access to healthy foods, more age-friendly environments, safer indoor facilities in a rehabilitation center, safer activity in terms of park and recreation spaces and places. And importantly, across all the projects, it's led to an increase in agency, efficacy, and connectiveness. A big concern, and particularly with our ethics committee, and even with our university when I was purchasing the app, was data protection. And I had to go through quite a lengthy process to get the university to approve the Our Voice app. But the strength is that the data is anonymized. It's stored on a secure server in Stanford. If by any chance a photograph, including a person's face or number plate registration is taken, it's pixelated. So it's all, the confidentiality is important. And the data depository is reviewed annually by Stanford's ethics committee. And then each institution that's using the Our Voice also needs their own ethics committee's approval to use the app and to conduct the citizen science project. Giving you an idea of where the Our Voice network is, it's spread quite widely across the world. And obviously we in Australia, we are represented as well as New Zealand. So it's more than 20 countries are part of this network. There's more than 20 government and community-based organizations and community-led projects. So I think what I really do enjoy about being part of this network is learning from other projects, learning from what's been done in other countries or other settings. You might pick up my accent is a bit different. So I am from South Africa. And I do have an interest in the global south of the majority world. So this helps me to stay engaged with projects in Colombia, South Africa, and Chile, for example. This gives you just a wide list of the collaborators involved in the Our Voice network, and important to highlight that Stanford University is the organizing institution. And this network started from a Robert Woods Foundation grant a few years ago, I think many years ago now, and has expanded. So shifting gears now to look at Toowoomba Healthy Towns, and why in Toowoomba? Well, firstly, and these are information that was given to us by various community groups that were involved in highlighting their concern about obesity in the region. Adult obesity is 20% higher in Toowoomba than the Queensland average, and inactivity is 45% higher. And concerningly, there's 31% of the children living in the Darling Downs, where Toowoomba space is also higher than the average. And then when looking at a mode of transport, and this is from the Transport and Manroads report, they found that 9 out of 10 trips into Rumba was made by a private vehicle, and there was only 1% of trips made due to cycling and only 7% due to walking. Looking at the purpose of the trip or the mode, according to the purpose of the trip, we can see in red, that's the private vehicle use. It's really the dominant mode of transport. And so there's a strong focus from the council and the Regional Active and Public Transport Committee to try to advocate for more active transport in the Toowoomba region. So that led us to the aim of our study. We called our study Healthy Towns, and it was to engage citizen scientists and find out from people on the ground about what makes their communities about what the features in their communities that either help or hinder physical activity and active transport. So just by virtue of setting, if you haven't been to Toowoomba, here we have Brisbane, which is the major city centre, and then Toowoomba is a 90-minute journey from Brisbane. That's where I conducted some of the research using the modified Monash model. This is an NM2 region, and then I also conducted some work in Oakey, which is an SM5 region. The participants in Oakey were 10 to 12-year-old children, and we managed to recruit 10 children. The participants in Toowoomba, we had an adults group, so between the ages of 18 and 59. We recruited 11, and we've just finished recruiting our older adults, which are the people older than 60 years. And the number of participants in this group is in line with many of the other Our Voice studies, where they find that 10 participants seems to be sufficient to generate enough information about a particular neighborhood or region. So following the Our Voice methodology, our first step was to discover. And here we asked people to go for a walk and take photos of things that help or hinder walking and cycling. A lot of this data, the project started before COVID, and then just as COVID hit, we thought that we could send them out onto the walks on their own, which is what was done in the US. It didn't quite work in our setting, and so either myself or the research assistant accompanying the citizen scientists on the walk, and essentially we were just there walking, not saying a word, not prompting when to take a picture or when not to take a picture. And I think the value of this was that when we looked at the photos and interpreted the data, having been on the walk myself gave me a better understanding of some of the comments. Just again with the discovery tool, as I mentioned earlier, you press the start of the walk. This just shows a bit clearer some of the precautions, which is included in our information sheets and consent forms as well, and they take the photograph. And this is an idea or an example of a picture one of the children took in Oakey. So this was in the neighborhood where they live and play, and you can see that they want to play on their sort of their what do we call it? Their scooters, the old style one, where they actually use their legs to move or ride their bikes, and they can't because there's no pavements and they feel unsafe. And the little blue button over here shows us exactly where the picture was taken. This particular picture was taken by most of our citizen scientists in the Toowoomba CBD in terms of being concerned about the priority given to vehicles. And quite a nice narrative from our citizen scientists in terms of why they took the picture. And then again, this blue dot tells us exactly where the photograph was taken. So once we collected all the citizen scientists completed their walks, this gives you an idea, as shown earlier, in just the collective map of where most of the goods and the bads were. We obtained 180 photographs from the CBD participants, and we obtained about just over 200 from the children. And part of it was we had children going in groups of 2, and then I think there became a bit of a competition between them to see who would take more pictures. So again, the next step is to what we call the discuss sessions. So what we did on our side as the researchers, we printed out all the pictures, one picture per page, and the citizen scientists then arranged the pictures according to various themes. They discussed the features, so they would arrange the pictures and standardize and go, oh, should we move something? Are we still happy with where everything fits for a particular theme? And from there, they also discussed potential solutions. It's important to note that this isn't just a looking at the negative in the community, because in some cases where there's something that's been positive or highlighted as well, that they feature that as well. This gives you an idea of some of the main themes that the Oakey children identified. The first was safety, including wanting to walk or go out walking with a parent or a caregiver in some areas. Oakey is a really small community. This is a very, very busy road. It's the main road into Oakey. And I'm not sure if you can see the skate park on this side. The play park is also on that side of the road, but the school is on this side of the road. So crossing the road was really dangerous and they felt unsafe. There was also safety from magpies in springtime. Looking at walkways, this was a photo of a walkway taken. It wasn't after a storm, and they really just wanted the walkway cleared. In comparison to this one being a positive, where the child noted that they like these little laneways between the houses because we can get to his auntie's house quicker. Water was interesting and was one I didn't anticipate would come up. So the one thing they noted was the temperature of the water, that when they're thirsty on a hot day, the water is often warm, and they would really like these butlers to be colder. But the other thing that they were concerned about was that the spout coming out of the water, or the height of the water, was really low. So lots of kids would put their mouths on the water spout, and so the next child didn't want to use the water spout because they were concerned about germs. So they advocated to the council to have the power in the water spout, if you like. This is a half basketball court, and they advocated, they felt that the court gets really busy, the same as with the skate bowl. And you know, these were, most of my participants were actually 10 years old, and they said on the weekends the big children push them out the way, and so they want a bigger park, a bigger play area, where they could play as well, and everyone could get a turn. And then a big one that came out of the children on a few of the parks and areas we went to was that it was great that there were toilets, but they were almost always locked or out of order. Yeah, these are some
162, I think. Did you write it down?
Sorry. Okay, I think someone's mic's not muted.
It'll be on my.
Okay, I'll keep going. So some of the things identified by the Toowoomba adults were crossings. This one, as I mentioned earlier, it created a lot of confusion as to whether they could or couldn't cross. And solutions that they have suggested is changing the color of the crossing and making it, refreshing it, because it was different paving at the points where they could cross, but it wasn't clear, and making the signs clearer. What they really enjoyed was seeing signs like this around the town, giving them a sense of where they're at and how far it could be to go. And they also liked walkways such as this one, where it was very aesthetically pleasing. Cycling and safety around cycling was a concern for the citizen scientists. They felt that motorists would often use this kind of crossing and sort of impinge on the green lane when they're taking the corner, or that the cycling areas would start and stop. And so there wasn't sufficient connectivity between the various cycling routes. They appreciated the aesthetics and the nature of Toowoomba. It's a beautiful town. And I don't have a picture here, but there's quite a lot of art and sculptures in the walkways and laneways, and they've certainly advocated for more of those. Safety was a big issue. These lights had gone up just a few months before the citizen scientists went on their walk, and they commented how now that there's lighting, particularly in winter, they feel safer to walk in those areas. A big part, and we haven't summarized the data from the older adults yet, but these pathways was a big thing that came up amongst the older adults, that the pathways one either created safety hazards, and in some cases where they wanted to use their non-motorized scooters, skateboards, or bicycles, that they didn't feel safe. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's on a free telephone booth. And one of the citizen scientists took the photo, and their reason for taking it, they said it was bad. And they said that this is in the middle of the CBD, and it's an obstruction because it's close to a lot of the nightclubs, and people who are drunk can bump into it. So they feel it was a negative. Where someone else took the same picture, and said, well, this is a positive because if they're out late at night and something happens to their mobile phone, they know that they can make a phone call and get someone to come and fetch them. So I thought that was quite interesting. In terms of the priority actions that were identified, and this was across children and adults, crossings was one of the big things they wanted. In terms of safer crossings for walking and cycling, they wanted clear messaging in terms of who had the right of way. And they felt that a cost-effective and feasible option for improving crossings was having more zebra crossings. And this was especially in Oakey amongst the children, where they said they want more zebra crossings, and they also want the lollipop lady to be on duty for a longer time before and after school. There was a great appreciation of nature, both settings. And some of the comments were that they wanted to see more native plants. There were some small areas that weren't very pretty, or small spaces that just looked run down, and they felt that if they had some more plants and trees to improve nature and aesthetics, it would make the area more walkable and also lead to improved air quality. So issues around climate change were discussed in some of the meetings, and I'm just aware of time, so that's why I'm not going into detail on every single thing. One of the things that the adults advocated for, so in Toowoomba, there's sort of a ring around the main city where you can have 8-hour free parking, but it's on the north, west, and east side of Toowoomba. In South Toowoomba, there isn't this 8-hour parking zone, and they wanted to have more 8-hour parking zones in South Toowoomba so that they could park there and then walk the rest of their journey into town. And we're hoping that this is one of the changes that will be implemented. There's a massive request around maintenance and signs. With the pavements, there was strong discussion in the adults group that they wanted concrete pavements, feeling that this has a longer lifespan, it's safer and easier to maintain. And then with both, mentioned the toilets in the children, but this was one of the things that came up with the adults as well, more toilets and better signage for toilets. So once they've identified that, the next step is the advocacy section. And so we were fortunate that 2 children volunteered and 2 adults volunteered. And then these children and adults that get together, and essentially they rank the priorities, they organize their own presentation. The only thing I'm there for is really to load it up on the PowerPoint for them. So it's very much a hands-off approach from us as the researchers, and letting the children and the adult citizen scientists lead the way. This is a photograph of one of the councillors. She chairs the Regional Active and Public Transport Advisory Committee. And the children and adults presented their findings to the committee, which was an important achievement, I think, for us in the project, because that particular committee has a strong focus on promoting walking and cycling. This is Councillor Jeff MacDonald. He's the deputy mayor, one of the deputy mayors of Toowoomba, and he was at that meeting, and he's been incredibly supportive of the project. And he has subsequently said, you know, it's great that you presented to RAPTAC, but you need to present to the broader council. And we were hoping to present at a broader council meeting in November, but it looks like it might only be in January. So I think some of the challenges we had was recruitment. I think we would have had a challenge with recruitment even if there wasn't COVID. The big challenge with children was that we needed a caregiver to accompany them on the walk. So while children might have been enthusiastic, the caregiver might not have been enthusiastic to join the discovery walk. And what really helped there is that we had 2 community champions who really bought into the initiative and saw the value of that, and they ended up going on the walks with children that were not their own, just so that they could get as many kids participating as possible. The other challenge was aligning the citizen scientists' priority actions with costs and feasibility. So even after we presented to RAPTAC, we did ask for a roundabout in 2 sections, and then subsequently learned about the costs and I think just the complexity of installing a roundabout versus installing a zebra crossing. And so our ongoing work is really remaining engaged with the town planners and particularly the engineers around some of the things that the citizen scientists have advocated for. Other feasibility, the children in Oakey wanted more destinations, and certainly we know that that's a determinant of physical activity. So they wanted a Target and a Big W and another chain store in Oakey, and that's unlikely to happen, certainly in the short term. So it was partly us working with the children and saying, you know, that might not happen. So let's see what else we can push along with the councillors. I think the success was that once we engaged the citizen scientists, they were highly engaged in the project, and they determined the walk. So we just tagged along, and for the most part, the walks were quite long. Just back to challenges with the older adults, really nervous about the technology. And one of the ways we overcame that was giving them our iPads or our phones, and just being there and supporting them. The other success was the council buy-in and really being invited to present this findings to the RAPTAC committee. I've got timing at the bottom, but it should have been higher. I knew that the RAPTAC committee was going to form a walking and a cycling action group to improve the walking and cycle ability of Toowoomba. So I knew I had a small window of opportunity to get the scientists and community voices heard. And the success was that 2 of the adults have been invited to be on the Toowoomba walking group. So their advocacy for their community has and will continue. And then subsequent to that, one of our partners is Queensland Walks, and together with Queensland Walks, we arranged a workshop where we invited some of the councillors to come on the walk where some of the citizen scientists have gone. And that was really valuable because they experienced the difficulty in crossing the roads, they experienced it and weren't aware of some of the challenges in their own city streets. So that's been incredibly successful. And the other success is that the Ipswich Council is interested in this project, so we will be expanding it to Ipswich as well. So with that, I would just like to thank you for your time. I didn't want to speak for too long, even though I love speaking, and rather use the time to invite you to ask any questions and get clarity. But thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tracy. It's so fantastic to hear about the project and really the incredible interest you've had both from community and your council partners and other organisations. It's wonderful to hear the project's being expanded. So big congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, go for it. I was just going to say we have about 15 minutes for questions and discussion. Please feel free to pop any questions that you might have for Tracy in the chat or unmute your mic and feel free to ask. I have one to quickly jump in with while people are coming up with some questions, if you don't mind. I mean, you already discussed how supportive and sort of bought in your council partners were. And I think that's wonderful. It's not always something you hear. I guess I just wondered how you found the process of sort of working with the council partners to interpret the findings that the citizen scientists generated and sort of how those findings met the needs of the council partners. I'm really curious, sort of you mentioned some of the concerns and action areas of priority to your citizen scientists, but I'm curious whether local stakeholders aligned in terms of what they saw as the priority areas?
I'll do my best to answer the question. I think the first thing was that I had started meeting with councillors 5 years ago, just meeting and just having, and it wasn't a councillor, it was an officer in the Toowoomba region. And I would have monthly meetings with her, just coffee catch-ups. And the idea was I wanted to get a sense of where they're at and what the council needed, where their focus was. And so it was through that, and then I was also part of this is a long name, the Safer Toowoomba Regional Partnerships Obesity Prevention Focus Group. And within that group, there's a number of organizations. So on my slides, you might have seen something, a logo for TISB, and they akin to a Chamber of Commerce, and they funded the purchase of the Our Voice app. And that was just from me being on that SDRP. And that SDRP was chaired by Councillor Jeff McDonald. So I think part of it was me just doing the legwork in listening and building trust. And that's also how I came about to know that they were looking at improving walking and cycling in the region. In terms of how some of our, I'm still being not attention. I think the people I have to convince more than that, I have to convince councillors as engineers. So where we wanted to propose a roundabout, thinking it was such a good set, right? And there was one roundabout where we just wanted a bigger island, a bigger safety so that the bicycle could sort of fit while the person was waiting. And then the engineers explained the physics of the roundabout and the circumference needed because Toowoomba is a lot of trucks go through it. So it needs to be a certain diameter to allow the trucks sort of in and out. And so yeah, I think what we're still doing, when the citizen scientists presented to council, they were far more engaged with the children, but they had so many questions for the children and getting the children's perspective. And I think that's what led one of the councillors to say, let's get Robin, one of the citizen scientists, on the working group. So those voices are still being heard. And we're really working with them now to look at the priorities the citizen scientists identify and match it according to their costing and feasibility. It's very much a work in progress, I think, but I feel confident that there will be some changes and some will take longer. And when we went on the workshop, that's, I think, when things solidified for the councillors, because that sign about the cars and pedestrians, they were kind of doing this. And then we went, what do you see?
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. That's really fascinating because it's something that's certainly come up through previous sessions where we've spoken about the importance of sort of, mutual gain reciprocity between those that volunteer their time and ensuring that what they'd like to get out of their involvement is reciprocated. But that sort of requires the project to meet the needs of the stakeholders and decision makers that have capacity to make change. So it sounds like the project's been really quite effective in sort of aligning those needs. And I appreciate it takes a long time to sort of build those relationships and make sure everyone's on the same page.
And it's also, the citizen science is a puzzle piece in a larger project that we're doing, really wanting to be not just community participatory, but community-led, and letting the community determine the issues for their own community and coming up with their own solutions. So in addition to this, we're doing focus groups and interviews and other work as well. So it will all come together to have, so this is what the community wants. These are the health concerns. These are the priority areas for them.
Thank you. I can see a question from Abby and Sarah. Abby, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or I'm happy to read it off as well.
Thanks, Leah. I think you kind of asked the same question I wanted to ask, and Tracy, you kindly answered it. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, no, a really important question. Sarah as well, did you want to unmute yourself at all?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Great. Tracy, and congratulate you and your team. So how long were the citizens given to take these photos and upload the data? And overall, how long did the whole project take?
That's such a good question. I thought so. Paul Gordon is also on the line, and he did a citizen science project in older adults residential care, and I think his project took maybe 3 or 4 weeks. So I was like, oh, I'll give mine 6 months, but it took 2.5 years. So it took a really long time, partially because I'm in a teaching and research focused position, so I didn't always have time to focus on intensive recruitment. In terms of the photos, we would start. So part of the protocol is we need to start and finish the discovery walk in an area that's got Wi-Fi, or you've got 4G, or they might hotspot with my phone. So at the end of the walk, we would download the photos immediately, and depending on the number of photos, it might just take 2, maybe 3 minutes to download, and it gets downloaded onto the Stanford repository immediately. And then for me as the researcher, I have a project code and ID, so I can go back, and then that's where I can pull the pictures and also ensure the transcriptions are accurate, changing in spelling that they might be from when they had their voiceover, and use that for some of our data analysis. The walks itself, because the citizen scientists could choose the route and where they wanted to go, and what we said to them is, walk to places that you would like to go, that you normally go, walk routes that you normally would do. So the children would walk to school and the library. The children's walks took a long time. It took about 45 minutes to an hour. The other challenge, and I did struggle with the boys, their attention span would ebb and flow. With the older adults, the walks are taking 45 minutes, but they're a bit slower. Whereas with the adults, it took half an hour at most. It was quite a fast-paced walk. The other thing is that I felt like I couldn't have more than 2 citizen scientists on a particular walk, because then they start influencing each other too much, and we wanted it to be separate, for them to take photos of separate things that appeal to them.
Great, thank you.
I'll just comment that we are the other way we've expanded the project, and again, this was in response to one of the councillors requesting this specific question. They wanted to know about things that help or hinder food choice in Toowoomba. So we are now recruiting a small group for that. And instead of doing a discovery walk, we're doing a discovery drive, because we want to see which stores they go to, or fresh produce markets they go to, because walking might not be feasible. I don't know if you shop within walking distance from your home, so we want to capture that. So I'll see how it goes. I'm not sure how it's going to work. Yes.
Fascinating. Thank you, Tracy. Anyone else with questions, please do feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I did just have one more about what's next for this project and your expanded work with Ipswich Council. I'm not sure how much you can speak to about that, but I wondered are they, is your work with Ipswich Council looking at a similar question around walkability, or is there different citizen scientists you're looking to engage with that work?
So in terms of just quickly what's next with the Toowoomba Healthy Towns, and particularly with Oakey, is we're just being tenacious at plugging away at the councillors and the engineers to get some change. I would be devastated if nothing changes. But I do feel optimistic that there will be some. So it's continued engagement with them. And I think also when we present to the broader council committee and get a multi-sectoral systems-based approach to this issue, perhaps we'll get more buy-in. Because for example, in GapTac, there's no one from Parks and Recreation there. So we need to get them engaged. With the Ipswich Council, it's a similar question. It's not specifically active transport, it's looking at physical activity for recreation and transport in the Ipswich area. There's citizen science lends itself well to improving equity and addressing issues of equity, and they've identified 2 low SES communities in Ipswich, and we are not going to do children. It's just going to be people over the age of 18 at this stage. I'm not sure.
Can I ask one more question, Tracy? It's such a fascinating project. Do you have any learnings to share in terms of managing the photos, and especially were there a lot of a narrative voice recording? So in terms of managing all those data and technology.
Yeah, I think the first learning I had, and I mentioned earlier, I'm so nervous with technology myself. So I'd always have backup devices. And I would make sure that the Wi-Fi, everything is enabled. With learning with the older adults, I had one older adult where she wanted me to take the photo for her, which was fine. You know, she showed me what to take the photo of. I think the other learnings in terms of managing the photos is I wanted the citizen scientists to come up with the themes themselves, you know. And Paul, who I said this on the call before, he just said, no, let us start with suggestions of themes, and then they put that together and they'll allocate the photos to the themes or create new ones. And I think that was a good idea. The other thing we are planning to do is look at how researchers would allocate the photos to various things and see if it matches what the citizen scientists did. Let me think. I think for me, the biggest learning for me was patience and be quiet. You know, it was, I would go on a walk and sometimes they'd miss something and I'm like, oh, maybe we should take a photo of that. Yeah, so Paul, I don't know, feel free to jump in at any stage if you like.
I was going to say, I think you're doing a great job, Tracy.
I think, oh, the other learning I had, I think there's a reason I'm not a year 4 teacher. So with the discuss session with the children, bringing them together, it was like I needed them to allocate these photos to things, needed them to come up with priorities, but every 2 or 3 minutes we would sprint around the room and we would do something to just, because I'd lose them, you know, this ebb and flow. So I think that workshop I had a run sheet for what I thought, but I had a lot more activity breaks in between, a lot more engaging and trying to pull them in. Because they had fun allocating the pictures, but when they had to discuss the theme amongst them, that's where I kind of lose them and gain them. Yeah.
And sorry, Maya, I was just going to say, Tracy, maybe you want to talk about your role sort of in the data collection and, you know, making sure it's the voice of the participants.
Yeah, so I think that, well, you can jump in, but I think when they were allocating photos to the various themes is to make sure that I'm not changing anything, that it's truly what they want. Like I said, the phone booth was one of the many interesting ones that came up. I really wanted and hoped that they would focus far more on the quality of the walkways and pathways. There's lots of trees in Toowoomba, and so the routes have created such unsafe pavements, but yet one of the big priorities for them was the nature and aesthetics that I've mentioned. So it's important to make sure that the scientist does have that voice. And then the other one was, as I said, when you're on the walk with them itself, is not to, so I would walk behind the citizen scientists, and it was just a very physical way of me making sure that I'm not prompting them by stopping them. It's really interesting process. You know, I wanted to make sure I'm not leading in any way. Yeah. The other thing, Sarah, coming back to learning, because I was with the caregiver on the children's ward, I use it as an opportunity to get their perspectives of, would they let the children walk this way? What are their concerns? So, and it was out of earshot of the child, and really getting a sense of realizing how much that children weren't the limiting factor for walking to school, and how much we need to engage with parents in Oakey going forward, to let them feel safe and yeah.
Sorry, I'll if anyone does have any last questions, feel free to jump in. I just don't want us to go over time, so I thought I'd make sure we sort of wrap things up there. And I did want to add Tracy's email and our team's email if you do have any further questions, but do feel free to jump in as well. I did want to just say a last big thank you to Tracy for a really fantastic presentation. It's been fascinating to hear your reflections about how you've gone with engaging quite different groups of citizen scientists and councillors and council partners in this project. So if anyone does have further questions, please feel free to reach out to our team on the Citizen Science and Prevention Project, or Tracy. I'm sure she's happy to answer further questions if you'd like to follow up with her directly. I've also popped a QR code here on this slide if you'd like to hear further details of future Citizen Science in Prevention Project events. Our next Community of Practice session will be in March next year. But yeah, a big thank you for your time and everyone for your contributions to the discussion. We'll send a graphic illustration of this session, the recording, and a text summary following the session. But if you do have time before your next meeting, we'd invite you to please complete a really brief anonymous survey we're conducting to help us improve and expand our capacity building efforts to continue to support the use of citizen science approaches in chronic disease prevention. So if you've engaged with any of our previous community of practice sessions, our resources, presentations, or support from our team, we'd really welcome your feedback on the relevance, usefulness, and impacts of these activities. So if you do have a couple of minutes to spare before your next meeting, you can scan the QR code on this slide to get more information and take part. And we'll also, I can see Pippi's popping a link to the survey in the chat. I'll also be sure to send the link to this survey. Oops, the lights in my room have just gone out at an appropriate moment. We'll share a link to this survey in the email with the recording as well following this session. But a huge thanks again to Tracy for your presentation and everyone for joining the session today.
Thank you for having me, and I hope to meet you all in person sometime.
Thanks, Tracy.